Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are diving headfirst into a really fascinating investigation. We're looking at one of the most hotly debated verses in ancient biblical texts. And believe it or not, this investigation is going to bring us face to face with an ancient Greek goddess and an absolutely wild clash of cultures. We're doing a deep dive into some source material that takes a really cool, almost documentary-style approach to unraveling this whole controversy. It's the kind of journey where we need to just leave our modern assumptions at the door and travel right back in time.
Our entire investigation really centers around one single powerful question. What does 1 Timothy 2:11 truly mean? The source text we're exploring today tries to unravel this ancient mystery, but not by looking at modern religious debates. Actually, scratch that. It completely bypasses modern debates and instead digs straight into linguistics, ancient city culture, and raw historical context. Let's see exactly how the author pieces this massive puzzle together. Section 1. The verse in question. Let's jump right into the actual passage that causes so much modern debate.
So here is the verse exactly as it appears in the King James translation. It reads, "Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection." Now, according to our source material, a lot of modern churches take this absolutely literally. They use it to forbid women from speaking, teaching, or really having any vocal role at all in a church setting. Basically, they read that word silence as a complete, literal gag order.
But here's where the author points out a massive contradiction. Right in other parts of the New Testament, like Acts chapter 2, verse 17, it clearly states that daughters shall prophesy. On top of that, the Apostle Paul actively encouraged women to prophesy and build up the church. And, you can't exactly prophesy or teach without actually opening your mouth and speaking, right?
So what does this all mean? How do we reconcile this? How can a literal interpretation of absolute silence just exist right alongside direct instructions for women to speak, teach, and prophesy in those very same ancient texts? Our source frames this as a genuine, undeniable mystery. Because if Paul isn't just blatantly contradicting himself, well then something major must be missing in our modern understanding of that word silence.
Section 2. Clues in the Greek text. Let's talk about translating the word hesusia.
Okay, what is really interesting here is the original Greek word used in 1 Timothy 2:11. That word is hesukeia. Now, as the author points out, this does not mean a total inability to make a sound. Instead, it literally translates to stillness. That is, desistance from bustle or language. It basically means to stop moving around in an energetic, noisy, or disruptive way.
Digging even deeper, the author looks at the actual root word, which is hesukios. This properly means keeping one's seat or being undisturbed and undisturbing. It paints this really clear picture of basic respect, just staying in your seat and not interrupting the speaker. The source suggests it was never intended as a total ban on vocalization. It was just a plea for people to stop being rowdy and disruptive.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive divide between modern interpretation and the original text. On one hand, we have the modern assumption, absolute silence, right? A total gag order. But on the other hand, based on the actual Greek translation, the author shows that the text was just asking for stillness, respect, and orderliness. But that begs the question, why was the specific correction even needed? Like, who exactly was being so incredibly disruptive?
Section 3. The goddess Diana of Ephesus. Let's look at the pagan context.
To answer that question, we have to zoom out and look at the geographical and historical setting. Paul's letter was written to Timothy, who was stationed as a pastor in one very specific, highly unique city, Ephesus. And the city of Ephesus was completely dominated by pagan worship. Specifically, they were fiercely devoted to a female deity. The book of Acts even describes a literal 2-hour riot where the city's inhabitants just passionately screamed in the streets, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." They were incredibly, fiercely protective of this goddess.
The author's historical research details exactly what this Ephesian culture looked like, and it's wild. It was a strongly matriarchal society. Women were the undisputed leaders in the temples of Diana, very often ordering the men around. And their worship style? It was loud, it was boisterous, and completely chaotic. Furthermore, they flaunted their status with these highly ornate braided hairstyles, completely woven with gold and pearls.
Oh, and there's another totally fascinating detail the author brings up here. Diana was actually considered the goddess of childbirth. Pagan women in Ephesus routinely prayed to her to be delivered from the pain of labor. The author notes that this deeply ingrained belief directly connects the dots on some of those super confusing later verses in 1 Timothy, the ones about women being saved in childbearing. It was very likely just Paul addressing and correcting their lingering pagan superstitions about Diana.
Section 4. A clash of cultures. Paganism versus the church.
So this brings us to a massive, totally inevitable collision. Here's the timeline of events the author pieces together for us. First, these really passionate pagans convert to Christianity. Second, as brand new converts, they naturally bring their old, loud, female-led temple habits straight into Timothy's new congregation. And third, they start disrupting the teachings. They're bustling about, asking noisy questions, and essentially trying to run the church with the exact same supreme authority they used to wield in Diana's temple.
It is entirely through this specific historical lens that the source frames that famous follow-up verse, 1 Timothy 2:12, where Paul says he does not allow a woman to usurp authority over the man. According to the author, Paul wasn't making some sweeping, universal statement about gender capabilities. Not at all. He was specifically addressing ex-pagan Ephesian women who were literally accustomed to lording over and usurping authority from men back in the Temple of Diana.
So, the absolute crucial takeaway here is this. The author's thesis is that Paul was telling these specific women to stop dressing like pagan temple leaders in golden pearls, to sit down, and to stop noisily interrupting the service. He was managing a very specific local crisis in Ephesus. He wasn't establishing a universal, timeless law regarding gender.
Section 5. Order instead of silence. Let's look at the true meaning.
Let's move to the resolution of this whole textual mystery, bringing together both those linguistic clues and the rich Ephesian history. The author reminds us of Paul's overarching philosophy for all church gatherings, which is found over in 1 Corinthians 14:40. Let all things be done decently and in order. And you know what? This aligns perfectly with that Greek concept of hesukia, staying in one seat, being respectful and not bustling around. Paul just simply wanted an orderly environment where people could actually learn without chaotic interruptions.
To concisely summarize the author's entire investigation, it really wasn't about gender, it was about order. The command for silence was actually a command for rowdy, newly converted Ephesian women to adopt a posture of respectful learning, leaving their chaotic, culturally dominant Diana worship habits firmly in the past.
And that brings us to the end of this explainer. It leaves us with a truly vital question. How does historical context fundamentally change our reading of ancient texts today? Because think about it, when we strip away the history of Ephesus and the original Greek linguistics, we get a gag order. But when we put that context back in, we get a fascinating story of culture clash and a simple plea for basic respect. It really makes you wonder, what other ancient mysteries are hiding just beneath the surface of the text, just waiting for context to bring them to light?
Please read the in-depth Bible studies on my websites at AMatterOfTruth and thechurchofthefirstborn.net. And if you like this Bible teaching song video, please share the link with others. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you richly for sharing the true gospel. Brother Mark.